Hey there, Banditos. Welcome to the latest episode of the Dollar Bin Bandits. I'm Mike Farah. Today, we have Mr. Joe Kelly on the program. Joe is a big-time writer. I'm sure you've heard of him. He is also another member of the Man of Action Studios / Collective. We've had 3 out of the 4. Joe Casey, we're looking at you next. But Joe Kelly has done so much in comics as a writer. Broke in 2099. He was actually a part of the Stan-Hattan Project, which was a joint venture between Marvel and NYU. Came up through there, put a big mark, a defining mark on Deadpool as a character. Worked also on Daredevil. Also, where he met, I think, Steve Seagal, his Man of Action compatriot on X-Men, then moved over to DC, Action Comics, some JLA, did Ben 10 as part of Man of Action. And of course, now he is on Amazing Spider-Man and just celebrated the landmark 975th issue of that title. Also done some independent stuff, including Steampunk, Four Eyes, I Kill Giants. Speaking of giants, he is really a giant of the industry as a writer. Let's get to it. This is Joe Kelly. Writer Joe Kelly. Joe, how are you?
I'm good, Mike. How's it going?
Great. Excited to have you here.
Well, thank you.
As always, our first question is, how did you first discover comics?
It's an easy one. I was at my grandmother's house and there was a box of comics like in the sort of basement area where she had us playing so that we wouldn't be annoying the adults. And and I found this cool box of, old comics, and it was my uncle's. And I asked him if I could have them, and he was like, "Oh, just take them. Who cares?" And it was all mostly DC. It was a lot of Superman, a lot of war comics, a lot of horror comics, which actually had a pretty big influence on me. Witching Hour and House of Mystery, House of Secrets. Well, House of Mystery, not House of Secrets. And and a couple of weird like old key, comics like the Phantom and just weird stuff in there. And Spider-Man. And I took those books, I read the hell out of them, and that was my comics collection for a really long time. Like I just
Okay.
reread those books over and over and over. And then it wasn't until like middle school I was sick and I had stayed home. I went to the doctor, and on the way back, we stopped at the the cigarette store for my mother to go buy cigarettes, and on a spinner rack there was Sienkiewicz New Mutants cover. I believe it's 19 with the Demon Bear Saga and Danny Moonstar on the cover, sort of
Right.
snow. And I was like, "Oh, these comics don't look like what I have. Like, let me check this out." And I just immediately got sucked in, by Sienkiewicz's art. And then that was it. And then I found out you could buy comics, and then I found a comic store, and you know, like everybody else, just got hooked.
That was the on-ramp. Was Sienkiewicz the first name you noticed in the books, or while you were going through your initial collection, did you sort of figure out that there were people that are actually doing this stuff?
No, in the beginning I really didn't, and it was kind of mortifying later to go like, oh yeah, this, I now know it was Ross Andrew, Spidey. But I would talk about the Spidey and I would go like, I'm not sure, like I
Yeah.
really didn't know. But yeah, Sienkiewicz was the first name I knew, and then obviously Claremont, so it was like, and then when I became like a Marvel zombie at that time and I was just buying those books, then I started paying attention to who was writing Spider-Man, who was on X-Men, etc. But that early box of books, I really did not like. I know the stories, I can identify pages, but I did not know who worked on them.
Now, were you immediately inspired to see comics as a future vocation, or was it always just kind of around you and then eventually you got into writing and kind of came back to it?
Yeah, I wanted to draw when I was young, and I remember the first comic book I ever tried to draw was an adaptation of The Empire Strikes Back from memory. Like I remember distinctly trying to draw that. Everybody looked like Bert from the Sesame Street. It was terrible. Like I was not good. And I tried to focus on art going up through school. Um, but I always had a propensity for writing. Like I was encouraged very early on by a couple of really great teachers, both in elementary school and then, further on to pursue writing. So that never went away. And it was a very dumb thing, but I got forced to make a decision in high school about like, would I stick with art or chorus for some reason. I had to pick. I actually stuck with art. Um, but then because it was high school and I got wrapped up in a bunch of other things, I couldn't really pursue it. So I never dedicated myself to it in the way that I would like to have. And it never occurred to me that I could be a comic book writer. I
Hmm.
was like, oh, you draw comics. Like nobody writes comics. Like I said, I didn't know the names. Um, and it wasn't until ultimately when I got to college that kind of became an inkling of a thought. Um, but yeah, and I don't think I'm alone. I don't think I'm the only writer who wishes they could draw. Um, I think a lot of us started out going, oh, I want to do that cool part. But, but yeah, it was not until much later.
Okay. And by foregoing chorus, you did not rob the world of a sterling voice,
I
did you?
don't think so. I don't think so. Yeah, I was part of bringing that up was because I thought it went the other direction that where I gave up art for chorus, but then as I was saying, I was like, no, of course I didn't. That would have been a terrible idea.
So
Uh,
I read about this program that
mhm,
you were in called the Stan-Hattan Project.
yeah. Hmm.
And I don't know if this was undergrad or you were pursuing a graduate degree, but this was a joint writing program between Marvel and NYU,
Yep.
that you were either the first or the first successful graduate of. Can you tell me a little bit more about what that program was
Yeah.
and what you got from it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I mean that's the kickoff of my career. I mean that's in the sometimes people are like, oh, what do I do to get into comics? And I'm just like, well, I'm not the best example. Like,
Right.
although there are plenty of lessons to be taken from from what I did. But the so as an undergrad, I went into undergrad for art and theater and whiffballed the whole thing. Like it was terrible. I graduated with a philosophy degree because
So did I.
I yeah, I could not maintain the other degrees. Um, I banged around as a production assistant in New York for a year, working on like commercial sets and TV sets, which was fun. And then I was like, I kind of tapped out, and I was like, I'm either gonna stick around and try to go into the art department and maybe try to get into visual effects or something, or try to go to school. So I applied to NYU for their screenwriting program. So it was very specifically the dramatic writing program was where we were. And I got in for graduate school. It was a big deal for me. There were like 20 of us in the program. And then I got to work in the program to pay for school, which was huge, because even though NYU did not cost them what it costs now, it was a hefty investment into something that I certainly had no reason for anybody to believe I'd be successful at, considering my sterling undergrad career. So while I was working in the department, the secretary and I, she was an older lady, we used to talk about comic books. It just kind of came up that I like comics, and she, because St. Mark's Comics, I don't know if you know Manhattan, but it's like right down the street from NYU.
I've been there many a
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, so that was my comic store while I was in school, and I had gotten I had fallen out of comics because they got expensive. I got back into them because my RD in undergrad had a nice collection he would let me borrow from. And so I we were talking about St. Mark's, and then she was saying how she learned to read from Superman comics. She saw the books on, I mean, much, older than me, on the it's like at the soda counter, like that style of youth. And she wanted to know what the pictures meant. So that's how she learned how to read, which I always thought was a beautiful story. So one day she says, hey, there's a letter from Marvel Comics on the director's desk, director of our program, who was like playwright with a capital P. Like she wanted nothing, she barely wanted anything to do with television and movies, but plays were the right thing. And she's like, it's going to wind up in the garbage. So you might want to take a look. So, I basically stole the letter and had Spidey on the cover,
Yeah.
on the stationery. And it was these two editors that were interested in starting this workshop, James Felder and Mark Powers. And I put the letter back, and then I, volunteered. Hey, I know something about comics, and what does Marvel want? So I conned them into letting this happen, and we ran the program. Um, there were only about 5 or 6 of us, I would say, in that first year, and the way that the guys taught it was we started sort of micro and went macro. So we started with dialogue, and then went out to sort of world building and plotting. It started out dialogue, and then eventually working on a page, and then eventually getting into scripts and plots, and until the full world build thing. And and they liked how I did dialogue, which was something that I was always into. When I was writing plays undergrad, dialogue was always my focus, and I really love listening to how people speak and messing around with that. So they offered me my first job, and we ran that program officially 2 years in a row while I was still there. And it was I got hired the first year, and then the second year was this young guy you probably never heard of named Brian K. Vaughan. And Brian, yeah, he's just some guy.
Up and
Uh,
comer.
yeah, Brian was an undergrad while I was a grad student in the
Okay.
department. So Brian got picked up next, and we both launched our careers. And Brian's had obviously so much incredible, well-deserved success. He's an incredibly talented guy. But it always feels like it's in the family. Like anytime
Yeah.
he does well. I'll take a glow credit off to the side of like, haha, I was there. But yeah, it was an awesome time. I mean, that's how I got into comics. And I had applied sort of, I still have a rejection letter from DC where I had pitched like an Elseworld when I was in college. And
Right.
um, Mike Carlin wrote me a very nice letter uh, telling me not to give up. But so I had, knocked on the door a little bit, but I didn't know anything about how to do it. That was about all of that, and the Marvel tryout book. Those are the two things that I knew. I'd never been to a comic convention. I'd never done any of that stuff. So once James and Mark got me in the door, that really kicked everything off. And so I did a little scripting over Carl Kiesel on a 2099 Fantastic Four book, because they were in charge of those books at the time. And then that led to some Daredevil stuff, all these little things like what ifs and Marvel fanfares. That's kind of how you get your feet wet. And then we did launch World of Tomorrow 2099. That was kind of my first crack at an ongoing with Ben Rabb. And then and I got Daredevil kind of around that time because Carl was done. And when you're a new person and a warm body, they just throw books at you because the books have to come out. And there's a lot of projects that they're like, oh, we need it fast. Somebody's late, or we need to fill in whatever. So there was, in the beginning of my time, I was doing like 4 books a month, which was great. Because I was a paid writer, and all
Yeah.
my other friends were like, oh, I don't know how I'm going to get a job. I guess I have to move to California, and I was lucky enough not to have to do that. So, and it was a wild year because I finished grad school at NYU, got the X-Men, and got married all in the same summer.
Oh my God.
Yeah, like it was 97 was a big year.
No kidding. Wow. Yeah, that's what a story. Um, well, it sounds like it was not only did it give you a lot of education in how to make comics and how to write comics, but also an entry point to comics.
Yeah.
And you were, as opposed to, I think, a lot of others that are maybe trying out in a certain way, that you were almost a known quantity by the time you got to Marvel because you were part of this program that editors had already kind of seen your work and your development, and so you were kind of ready to go right out of the gate.
Yeah, it was super helpful. I mean, it really was. I forgot how long the program was. It was probably like 6 to 8 months or something. I mean, it was pretty regular, every other week meetings, I think. And yeah, it was a really unique opportunity. I mean, it was essentially like it wasn't an internship. It was kind of like unofficial and off on the side, but it had the benefit of what an internship would do, where, I got to know Mark and James. They got to see my work in different ways. You got to ask questions. I mean, you're in a very small group, so you get to ask all these questions. um we had all these physical materials because nothing was really digital, so they would just come in with stacks of copies of books and scripts and all that stuff, which was awesome. Um and yeah, we really it was also an extension of like the assistant editor class, which is kind of a famous thing within. I'm sure DC does it too, but I knew about it through Marvel, where the editors would sort of take turns teaching, not just editors, actually professionals too, would take turns teaching the sort of upcoming, editorial staff what everything they knew about comics. So they took some stuff from that and integrated it into our lessons, and then eventually we all got to go to the office, and the cool old Park Avenue office, which I was just reminiscing with people about the other day. Um, so yeah, it was an incredible opportunity. It really was. It was something special, and I don't know if it could be replicated. I mean, it could be replicated by anybody if they chose to. But I love that this. I'm sorry, I keep getting distracted. I'm gonna move
Is
this
that
picture.
Baymax?
Yeah, it's this little Baymax stuffed head, but because it
Okay.
looks like a
Yeah, it
face,
keeps flashing on and
yeah,
off
it keeps
in
popping.
yeah.
um, but yeah, anybody could do it. But I think once you get into the sort of corporate stuff of who owns what thing and blah blah, it can get a little challenging.
Yeah. Well,
So
especially now with the
yeah,
corporatization
yeah,
of the
exactly.
companies.
Exactly. But
Um,
James ended up working at NYU, and basically he is now a fixture in my old department, which is awesome. So
right.
and has taught many people the Marvel ways.
And you do some teaching as well, right?
Yeah, I haven't done it in a long time, mostly because of schedule. But yeah, I've taught over there at NYU a bunch of times, and taught writing for comics and writing for animation. And I mean, I really enjoy it. I love working with new writers, and um, they always have the best questions. And it's like it's a way to also double check your own nonsense. Like it's very easy to go like, oh, I do it this way, and then people start poking holes in that, and you go, oh, I guess I don't. Maybe I don't believe that anymore. I should stop telling people this is how I do it. So yeah, I love it when I have the opportunity. I just uh, once I got really busy um, as a professional writer, it became challenging to do that
Yeah.
because unfortunately, it's I'm just far enough outside of the city where it's like if I'm going in for a 2.5 hour class, it's an 8 hour day. Like it's
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that becomes a little challenging.
Makes sense. So let's get into some of the projects. First of all, you mentioned already 2099, which is kind of the world you broke in on. Did you have any pre-existing, knowledge and also opinion about 2099 as a concept? And were you happy to sort of take on as your first bigger assignment, the World
Oh,
of Tomorrow?
happy 100%. Yeah, I mean the idea that somebody would hand over anything uh, to me, and like I said, Ben Rabb was co-writing it with me, and we had a great time. I mean, it was super fun because it was like a blank canvas. Like you had or maybe a paint by numbers is a little better way to describe it. It's like you have this shape because you have to use modified versions of Marvel characters, and it's like, oh, can I do something cool with that? Um, so it was really fun, and I didn't really have a strong opinion one way or another. I mean, it's going into it, I know that I had read certainly Spidey 2099, when it came out, but it was just like, yeah, this is something fun and cool and exciting as an assignment. I didn't really expect it to last super long, and it didn't. I think we got 8 issues out of it, but yeah, it was just great, and it's where I got to work with Pasquale Ferry, and we became friends, and collaborated on a lot of stuff after that point. So to get to work with him and see his, for me, mind-blowing artwork was, a real treat. So I learned a lot. I mean, that's what you want. If you can get paid to learn, there's nothing better than that in any industry. Like, it doesn't matter what you are, what you're in. So that was essentially what was happening.
That's great. I think eight issues for someone who's basically a rookie is
Yeah.
pretty darn
Yeah.
good. You also mentioned Daredevil,
Hmm.
and I'm wondering, your other big series around that time, and I'd love to know if there was a sequencing or if you were working on them at the same time, which was Deadpool. Um, because those are, if you were working on them at the same time, those are very almost diametrically opposed
Yeah.
characters.
Yeah.
And I wonder how if you've had a little Jekyll and Hyde, well, if you were writing them at the same time, sort of doing both.
Sure, absolutely. No, and I was doing both at the same time because when we did the annual, we were able to bring them both.
Right.
Daredevil, Deadpool annual was because I worked on both, and no, I loved it. I mean, it was Deadpool obviously is the cornerstone of my career. I mean, it's if I had not gotten Deadpool, things could have gone in a vastly different way. I certainly would not have gotten X-Men because Deadpool was what got me in that office. Um, there was a lot, the cosmic, tumblers were all kind of in place at the right time. Um, and Deadpool was just such a wild experiment for us, because it was like Matt Idelson was the editor, and he accepted a pitch for me that was just very different than what other people were pitching. Mostly he was getting mercenary for hire, tough guy with guns kind of stuff, and
Yeah.
I was like, oh, Deadpool fights Obnoxio the Clown and Ego the Living Planet and steals the Heroes Reborn ball from Franklin Richards because he's a dick. Like, it was stuff like that. Like, I thought it could be fun and goofy because I thought, well, if I was going to stick with this character for a long period of time, he had to be endearing in some way. I really had to lean into the comedy of it. So that was what he got, and ultimately how I got that book. Um, so to do that while doing Daredevil, it was a good sort. It's actually for me that's better. Like, I think if you have to do 3 or 4 books a month and they're all the same, it's really easy to bleed thoughts and ideas across those boundaries. But if one is like, hey, this is kind of grounded and there's legal drama, and Matt is this very straight arrow, and then you get Deadpool being a knucklehead, and then you have the X-Men being their, X-Men crazy mutant family. It's easy to compartmentalize my brain in that regard. So it was, yeah, that's when Jekyll and Hyde is useful. It definitely is.
Yeah, and a third persona because you were working on X-Men at the same time, right? So it's these three, but you said 4 books. Was it these two X-Men and something else?
It probably was whatever just came across the desk. It's like, because like I said, I mean, if somebody asked, I said yes. I mean, it was just because A, I was still trying to prove myself. B, I was, like I said, I was about to get married. So I'm like, yes, I will take whatever money you want to give me. Um, and I was getting paid to do something I love. So yeah, I just said yes all the time. The max I ever did was, I think, 4 books a month, but I don't recall exactly what they were, but those three for a while. And then, Daredevil went away because Kevin Smith was coming on, which was totally reasonable. I was like, yeah, but I
What are you
was
going to do
like,
about that?
yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I know people have opinions, but I'm like, yeah, of course. Like, if you get a rock star to come in and take over the book, like, I'm bummed, but yeah, like, bring it on. I hope he does a great job. So that made sense. But yeah, and then eventually it was Deadpool um, and X-Men for a while. That was the main gig.
I want to dwell just for a moment more in Deadpool
Yeah.
because I'm trying to figure out like how much of Deadpool was there when you got on the book in terms of obviously there was the end of New Mutants, there was X-Force, and maybe a mini series. But you tell me, like, where was he in terms of character development? He had basically, to the description of the you made of the other pitches, was basically kind of a mercenary, cool looking mercenary, maybe vigilante. Had a lot of cool weapons. Didn't have sort of the personality he's known for now, which is what you introduced. But
Mhm.
what were you coming in with? It wasn't a complete blank slate, but I'd imagine closer to that.
Yeah, I was really informed by, the two miniseries that led
Mhm.
up to mine, right? So Mark Wade did one and Fabian did one.
Yep.
And, they both were messing with sort of like in my recollection, trying to mine more of what he was as a character. Like I do this every single time in one of those miniseries, but I forget which one. Somebody rips off Deadpool's mask and he freaks out and he's like, "Give me back my face." And that was the thing that I really hooked into. Like, oh, he's insecure. Like the insecurity factor. How do I take that and exploit that? Because I could really understand that now as a guy. Like it's not just a weakness of like, oh, if you see my face, I shrivel up and I can't fight back. It really was like, oh no, he's so ashamed of who he is. Why is that? And then that started to inform this character because since I wanted to do the comedy, Stan always used to say like Spider-Man uses comedy as a shield, right? Like he was, to cover his fears or um, to sort of help him get past violence, all that stuff. But for Deadpool, it's a weapon. So it's like
Mm.
that became the like a turning point for me. And certainly I had heard, Rob talk about wanting Spider-Man with guns. I mean, like that was kind of something that had come up in the office. So it was like, okay, cool. Like let's lean into the joking part. But now I know like this dude is broken. And if I'm gonna stick with him and if I'm gonna have fun, what is this sort of theme? Like, can we do a guy who wants to be good? But then I was reading those some of those early appearances and he's not a good guy, right? Like Deadpool, especially early Deadpool he was bad. Like he was a flat out bad guy.
Right.
And
Yep.
so it's, it was going to be this redemption book and asking whether or not redemption is possible. And what we used to just say in the office was like, he's a guy who's bad guy who's trying to be good, but he's constitutionally incapable of doing so. And if by some miracle he pulls off a good act, any kind of good deed, the universe kicks him in the nuts. Like that's he will always suffer for doing good, which is again a mirror of Spider-Man.
Mhm.
Um, but that was what we ultimately like when Matt and I were talking about it, where we landed, and really became the version of the character that that set the stage for what people know. And obviously, many very cool and awesome people took the book over after me. When I left, it was because I thought it's like they kept telling us we were canceled, right? So it's like, all right, you're going to be canceled. And then people would write in actual handwritten letters. Oh, please save the book. Don't cancel it. And then it would come back for a couple of months, which was amazing. But that happened a couple of times, and I kept starting stories and having to stop them and starting and stopping. So it became a bit much. I was like, I think I'm gonna move on. And then obviously Deadpool did not need me and continued to go. I just saw I just saw Christopher Priest at a con, and I never got to see him in person, so I finally got to thank him for he took on right after me. He took the issue right after mine. And the first thing he did was have Deadpool drag this bag labeled like Joe Kelly's good ideas and chucked him in the ocean or down a pit and I was like, that was such an awesome like transition. I appreciated it and I finally got to thank him for it. Um, but obviously, there have been remarkable runs, since I did it. Gail and Jerry come to mind and they just kicked ass.
Yeah.
So current Deadpool is obviously like you know, a menage of all of them mixed
Oh,
in.
absolutely.
Yeah.
We talked to Priest, and one thing that came up in our conversation and applies here is when you can deploy humor in a very strategic way, it really works.
Yeah.
And it's hard to do. I think it's probably harder to do than serious quote unquote comics, but being able to use a sense of humor to sort of characterize, but also to bring in some levity
Hmm.
when cut things with levity, that
Sure.
may be getting a little too dark. So I think Deadpool was a really great, or your run on Deadpool was a really great sort of antithesis to, I think, a industry. Well, I don't know if I want to paint with that broader brush, but comics that had been getting, so dark and so
Right.
weighty and collapsing under their own weight. So it was great to have someone who did not take himself and the world too seriously.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I think we're all the children of like Frank Miller and Alan Moore, right? I mean, like they loom so large
Right.
in the time that we were reading comics, really formative years. And even the younger generation than mine, even if they didn't pick up Dark Knight on the stands, like the reverberations of those two specifically, there are others, of that time that were sort of leaning into the dark postmodern comic thing. But those two in particular, they just they just sent shockwaves right through the system. So we all have that in us. And then it's kind of like, well, either you embrace it and lean into it and go, I want dark and gritty and I want my comics to be super serious or whatever, or you go, okay, we had a lot of that, like you said, properly used antithesis, which I love. How do we sort of bounce off of that and go, well, there's another corner over here and it's a little lighter and brighter. You can still get serious, you can still get drama. There's plenty to be mined here, but also we can laugh about, a purple ray. Like it's really okay. It's so
Exactly.
good. And it's tough because I find that fandom at large, I think this is interesting with creators too. Um, uh, some of us, like I everybody gets picked on in one way or another in their lifetime. But comics were not cool for a really long time. Superheroes were not cool. Like if you were wearing a shirt with Spider-Man on it, you were a child. Like you weren't cool. And now it's everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Like that is a vast difference from the time I grew up versus now. And I think that when you spend your time in love with a thing and then you have the opportunity to make that thing, or you get to be in a position where you're like, oh, well, now I'm in charge. You want it to have real gravity to be like, this is what I've suffered for, right? This is why you got to understand. And sometimes that's a beautiful thing, and sometimes it just comes off as angry and it's unnecessary because part of what we loved about it was really, really silly. And we got to remember that too.
You were writing, as we said, all of these issues at the same time. We talked about Daredevil versus Deadpool.
Mhm.
I wanted to ask also Deadpool versus X-Men, or in concert with X-Men, in terms of your experiences editorially, because I know
Mhm.
there were some difficulties on X-Men, and I wonder if, because you had a lot of it seemed a lot of freedom with Deadpool.
Mhm.
Took them in all these different directions, like introduced, this meta humor that was not part of the character before. And yet, from what I read of the experience in X-Men, that it seemed that you were a little bit more pinned in
Right.
terms
Mhm.
of where you wanted to take stories or maybe crossovers that had to come in. Uh, was it again a sort of a Jekyll and Hyde kind of situation for you in terms of having all of this freedom and characterizing Deadpool and yet being sort of narrowly again pinned in with the X-Men?
Yeah, well, it was no it in this particular case it actually did ultimately all fall under the same umbrella. We just had kind of built a mini fiefdom with Deadpool that insulated us a little bit. Not
Okay.
completely, but when we would do like cover stunts or get away with Deadpool month or things like that and there would be sales to reflect like, hey, people really like what we're doing, it helped protect us a little. But one of the things that I think people forget is that, at that time, that's when Marvel was going bankrupt, right? Like the bankruptcy was happening. And it's like impossible for people to even understand that now. Like Marvel went bankrupt. I'm like, yeah. And so there it was a fire sale, and there sorts of things were happening behind the scenes that I wasn't privy to. But what was very clear was that people were operating out of fear because nobody knew if they had a job, in 6 months. I mean, there had been massive layoffs, there had been all sorts of stuff. So I say that as a table set because these are everybody that you ever work with. I mean, it's real people. It's easy to just be like, oh, editorial, but it's not. I mean, these are people that had dedicated a lot of time to a company and were worried about losing their jobs. So what had happened with the, like I said, we were generally okay with Deadpool. A little bit of that came in, but not too much. With the X-Men, it was like, okay, this is the top book. We're giving it to, it was me and Steve Siegel, and and we became best friends. And so that the greatest thing that for me of the X-Men was meeting Steve. And we started and we had a really good run in the beginning. But then we would find that dialogue would get changed in the books. Like we would get our copies of the printed book and things were changed. And so we would ask the guys, we'd say, listen, we get it. Sometimes, you have a second thought or whatever, but please let us know. We will do anything you want. And, it wasn't all digital. So I mean, there were fax machines and stuff. Or like if you just call me at 2 in the morning, I don't care. I would rather stay up all night and rewrite an entire issue than have somebody else do it and put my name on it. And we asked for that a bunch of times. And, for all the reasons, they weren't able to do that. And then when we would have these crossovers or these big events, sometimes people got cold feet about things. So we would start and build something. And then by the time you got to the end, they were like, oh no, we're not doing that anymore, even though we had pitched it 3 months, 4 months in advance and had built towards it. So, like all new, all different X-Men is an example. It's like they were not meant to be living hard light holograms. Like we really had all new, all different X-Men with a story that was going to come of it.
Right.
And that had to change, So that got frustrating. And then they were frustrated as well. And so after we did the Hunt for Xavier, the next time there was going to be an event, they basically said, hey, so what we think we'd like to do is we will break down the stories and you guys will execute them in the scripts. And, there are plenty of industries where that works. I mean, that's essentially how television is done. It's done in a big room, everybody figures out the season, and then you get handed your script, right? Um, but that was not what we were hired for. So, after a lot of hand wringing and a lot of like, can you quit the X-Men? Like, is that a thing a human could do? Steve and I decided to quit. And it was terrifying, honestly. And my my daughter was about to be born. Like I was months away from my first child, and I was like, honey, I don't know if I could stay at Marvel if I quit the X-Men. I kind of feel like I'm not supposed to stay if I do that, but I can't keep working this way. And she said, oh, yeah, you'll figure it out. Don't worry about it, which, was the greatest gift she could have possibly given me. And luckily it did all work out, but that was really it. So it wasn't, I think, and again, it's, I don't have any anger about that time or anything like, I know some people talk about, oh, we got screwed or whatever. It wasn't pleasant while we were all going through it, but in retrospect, it's like I said, these are regular people trying to do the best job they could. They had all sorts of pressures coming at them that I certainly didn't know anything about.
Right.
Um, and they were just trying to do their job the way they thought was best. It just didn't work out. So, that's why we ultimately left. And and it gives you you learn a lot about playing with other people's toys. I mean, you sort of know it even as a young writer, like, okay, I get to write Batman. It's like, yeah, but Batman will never be yours.
Right.
Never, right? If you're lucky, you get to do something, you get to leave a mark, and maybe you get to have a run that you feel like, oh, I was on this for a couple of years, and that's cool. But it's never yours. So it helped shape how I approach things, certainly for the rest of my career. Um, in a good way, in a good way, just being aware of like there's going to be limitations, there's a system, you've got to figure out how to work within that system. Anybody who thinks they're just going to magically show up on the front steps and go, I'll solve everything, it doesn't really work that way. Maybe every once in a while there's a super genius who comes along and does that. I'm not that super genius. So
And you said the silver lining was meeting Steve, and ultimately, and I don't know how soon after this, but you guys formed Man of Action
yeah.
along with your two other members. Can you maybe give me a little bit of a timeline between working on X-Men and when that idea
Yeah,
and I'm
sure.
not sure if it was both of you had sort of a mutual come to Jesus moment and like, let's do this.
No,
But yeah,
we
please go.
I met Duncan on a one shot. We did a Juggernaut one shot, so that's where I met Duncan Rouleau. Because Duncan's penciling is just out of this world and always has been. It's always bizarre and wild, and I love it. And we hit it off really well, and we were just like phone friends for a very long period of time before we ever met. And then all those guys live in LA. I'm the only one who's out in New York. So they were all kind of in the same circle. So Duncan and Joe and Steve, but didn't all know each other. And then they kind of started to get to know each other better. So then when we were on X-Men, Joe Casey started on cable, and I was trying to always get Duncan to do stuff in the X office. So we all kind of were there together, just overlapping. And then we would have these story conferences, and we liked, working on stories together. Obviously, Steve and I did a lot of stuff, and we enjoyed that process. So then after we left and we migrated over to DC, it was me and Steve, and then Joe Casey came over, and Steve had already had a long history with DC, obviously with Vertigo. But we started migrating into the Superman books, and then I was able to get Duncan on Superman, to do some stuff. And so then we all went over there together. And again, we liked working together. And around this time, some of Hollywood was starting to wake up to comics, both as source material, but also looking at the talent, as writers. And all you heard were horror stories of how badly people were treated. Um, so we had this kind of cockamamie idea that, oh, well, maybe if we said we were a company, we would get treated better. Uh, it didn't work, but it was a good idea, and it sort of forced us to, to do some things, to act like a company. So the first thing we did was we got a booth at San Diego, um, which we always like to say we really just did to have a place to sit, so we didn't have to walk the floor all the time. And I had just started this website. We had a buddy who's his name is Scott Breck. He's done many things. He's a writer. He's a books on tape narrator. He's a very talented dude, actor. He does a lot of things. And he used to have this business card that said rocket scientist and brain surgeon. And I always just thought that was funny. So I was like, well, what's the most ridiculous business card I could have? And so I made up Man of Action, and then had a website and the whole bit. And I was like, "Oh, do you guys want a website? Like, do you want an email address?" And they were into that. And that was really this weird, stupid like cloud of disparate ideas all kind of congealed and formed a company, quote unquote. And then we had our booth at San Diego, and then again in a right place, right time thing. We all knew we wanted to do other stuff. I mean, that was the thing. We all had aspirations to work in film or TV primarily.
Hmm.
And then when we were at our crazy booth, um, Matt Senreich, who was co-creator of Robot Chicken, uh, at the time had just started working with Adult Swim and Cartoon Network, and they had asked him about doing like a boys adventure show. And he's like, we don't do that, but I know a lot of comic book people, so let me talk to some people. So Matt introduced us to the exec over at Warner Brothers. And then we were like, oh, well, there are four of us. And he was like, well, how does that work? And I was like, oh, we're like our own writer's room. We'll pitch you, 20 ideas in 20 minutes. It'll be awesome. And that sounded really Hollywood and cool. And then he left, and we're like, we have to make up 20 ideas now. And we did. And we cooked up, we each went away, came up with 5 ideas, and then did this crazy pitch where we had a bell, and if you went on too long, the bell got rung. Like, you had to do it in a minute. It was just like fast, fast, fast. And if this exec heard anything he didn't like, he was like, "Nope, move along." And we're like, "Okay, cool." And then one of those ideas was Ben 10, and that skyrocketed our whole thing. I mean, the slowest skyrocket ever. I mean, it took 2 years of development. It took a very long time to get Ben on the air, but that was how Man of Action really became a company.
And yeah, you said Ben 10 really it took off.
Mhm.
A slow
Yeah.
whatever, a slow rocket ship, as you said. Uh and but it did really well. And it's interesting that you all did have this aspiration to do something. You all wanted to continue, I would imagine, doing comics because you
Hmm.
all did continue doing
Exactly. Yeah.
comics, but what you wanted to do as the collective was more in the realm of TV, and you really, I think, specialized mostly up until this point, at least in animation. Um, what is it like working with Man of Action versus working on your own? There are the obvious differences, but I'd love to hear sort of how different parts of your, I guess, brain work when you're, doing animation and working with the others of the group versus, doing your own comic scripts.
Yeah, I mean, we're very lucky that yeah, maybe one day it would be fun to write a novel, but up until this point, everything I've ever done is collaborative, right, in some way. So in comics, I'm working with an editor and a bunch of artists, um, primarily my penciler slash primary artist. Uh, with the guys, we would collaborate on stories in general, like, oh, what are we doing for a year of Superman? And we'd all be kind of in a room together and you kick ideas around. And you have to sort of have the how do you navigate other humans as part of the thought process. It's not as simple. I don't love it when people go right to the rock band metaphors, but it is the easiest one. It's just like everybody's got a thing they're really good at. You all kind of come together, you try to Voltron up and make something cool, but you all have different ideas,
Mhm.
and learning how to navigate those and fight them out without fighting each other, right? That's the hardest part. But it's really valuable because then when you get outside of your circle, I mean, the four of us are theoretically the safest place you could work and look stupid and have shitty ideas and all that stuff. Um, when you go out into the world and then all of a sudden now you have to have those same ideas in front of other people, you've had a lot of good practice of kind of, oh, all right, well, at least when my friend puts up a concrete wall and I run face first into it because my idea was bad or he saw the thing I didn't see, whatever. I now know what that feels like. I felt it 100 times. So now when it happens in front of a studio executive or something, I can just be like, oh, yeah, you're right. There's a better way to do it. Let's move on. It's not as crushing. Um, so having that laboratory was really valuable. And then once you get into animation or video games, you are automatically playing with other people's toys almost from jump. Ben was very unique in that we were, it was our thing. We were cooking it up new, but we didn't have any animation experience. So there was showrunners that were brought on. There was obviously writers and artists throughout the whole thing. So yeah, you're learning that whole side of the industry. Um, I mean, it's a wild ride, but it is the best. Like it is the thing I probably enjoy the most about this stuff is getting to collaborate with other creative people, and when you get people, sometimes it can be disharmonious and it's not fun. But that I would say that generally is not the majority of the time. It's usually you're with very smart people, and even if you disagree, you're getting cool stuff, you're having cool moments, and makes you a better writer, and you get to learn from other people. You know, Duncan's an incredible big idea guy. Like he can just you just wind him up and then let him go. And it's just like, here's this entire world in like 15 minutes. And holy crap. Like, I don't think that way. I'm a much more, structural thinker. And Steve is so like Steve likes to break structures. He likes to go, okay, this is typically how it's done. Let's, throw it against the wall and pick the pieces back up and mess with that. It's a totally different way of thinking. and I really enjoy that. And Joe's like a bullet. Like Joe just goes like, "Oh, I can get from A to B. Here, this is how I think we should do." It's like poof, and then he has it all laid out. It's really interesting to see how everybody works, and so I tend to really enjoy that. When you're by yourself, you get to do all those things, but you're doing it and hoping that it's going to work. Like your feedback loop is all self-generated, right? It's like I have to write something and come back to it, or I have to write something and then like listen to the voices in my head or the belly barometer that's like, no, that actually sucks. Like you can do better, as opposed to having a human gently say, maybe we could push that a little better. Maybe there's a more clever way that we haven't already seen. Things like that. So but you're also then nobody's telling you no, and you can pursue your own Jones. You don't have to explain to a person, this is going to make sense in 15 pages, but I need you to be confused now. Like you just do it. And
Yeah.
then when your editor reads it or your artist reads it, they read all 20 pages and they're like, "Oh, great, that made sense to me." You don't have to explain it in process. So it's there's a trade-off, but I like that comics avails us the ability to go off and do our own thing. I like that when you work in any of the sort of animation or live action stuff, you work with a group and then you have to go write the script, usually by yourself. So you have kind of both. Um, I hope that answered. That's a
Yeah.
bit rambly.
No, it sounds like having a balance
Yeah.
of both is really kind of the sweet spot.
Yeah.
And I on the theme of collaboration, I would love to know when you are on your own, not man of action
Mhm.
necessarily, and working in comics, which you did do say, and it is still collaborative. What makes a good writer artist connection or relationship? Because you've mentioned already Pasquale Ferry, who you've collaborated with a number of times, including
Mhm.
on Superman when you came over from Marvel. What makes that relationship like sync or work?
That's a great question. Sometimes there's like a tension that comes between a writer and an artist in a comic that works even if it's not healthy, right? Like, and people can look up their history and figure out the types of teams that I'm talking about. But there are people that like overtly fought, but the books did better because of it, right? I'm not that person. Like, I'm not good at that. What works for me is sort of like I write full script as a general rule. Like I try to I just feel like it's my job, and I'm more comfortable that way. That's how I was trained. Since I was trained to screenwrite, I think of a full script. This is how I write. Some people would just hand over plots, and then they do the dialogue after the artist breaks it down. But though I write full script, the expectation is always do whatever you want. Like, this is what I need to have happen. You see why, but you're a storyteller too. So if you have a better way to do it, or you can do it in 5 panels instead of 6, or you can do it in a splash, do whatever you want. And then I'll accommodate. The You don't know until you've worked with somebody a little bit, but for me, the teams that have worked the best, it's always they enjoy the writing, so they're having a good time as they read it. It transports them a little bit, which is sort of my goal, is just the way I was taught. We certainly want your scripts to be clean, but I want them to evoke feeling, right? So they get that. And then as a result, what comes out of them is really close to what was in my mind's eye. And even if they change something, it's as if it was meant to be that way. It's like they totally did something. They turned 6 panels into a splash, and I'm like, of course it was a splash. Like, that's better. So you get this give and take in a language that's, it's all visual. Um and it's I don't know, for me it's we have similar reference points a lot of times, like, not not age, but we like similar things. We have enough overlap in our Venn diagram of like, we've seen a lot of the same movies, or we have a lot of the same influences, but then there's stuff that they bring to the table that's fascinating that I know nothing about. and then I'll do the same. Like with Pepe Larraz right now, like on Amazing. Like Pepe's like a classically trained painter. It's like so every once in a while he'll do something and go, "Oh yeah, this is like this Baroque artist." Then it reminded me of this, and I'll it blows me away, right? Like it's incredible for, a Spidey cover. Like it's awesome. Um, and I'll find that really inspirational. Pasquale was always like that. Like, um, I always found his work fascinating, and I didn't know about his sort of early '80s work. So then when I went back to his like just pure black and white stuff, that always blew me away. So it evoked a lot of imagery that then I felt like, oh, okay, maybe we could convey that. Duncan is the same way because Duncan really he sees the world like nobody else I know. So the stuff that he will bring to a script is fascinating when he's an artist. So I guess it's can you do you mind meld really? Like, do you hit that point where it's like these are the two brains you get like this, but there's still enough on either side where there's your individual voices? Because I think if it's all the same, then you're in a too much of an echo chamber, and that's not great. So you do want some push and pull. Um, that takes time. Ken Nomura, who I've done a lot of work with. Ken's a genius as far as I care, and everybody brings their own style to something, but Ken is like he's got style, he's got technique, his storytelling is super tight. Like I Kill Giants was such a baby of mine for such a very long time. And then when he showed me his Barbara designs, he's the one who put the rabbit ears on her for the first time. And I was like, "What's up with these ears?" And he's like, "Oh, I feel like I know girls, like I went to school with girls that were into manga or D&D or any of that stuff, and like some of them wore like cat ears to class and stuff, so I just thought she should wear that stuff." And it was a complete home run. I didn't have that in the script. Like I originally based her on my daughter, like grown up. My daughter had a lot of curly hair, and um, she would have looked like if he had done specifically what I had asked him to do in the script, she would have looked like Merida from Brave, like had all
Mm.
this crazy tangle of hair. And he just didn't like how it looked, and so he's like, I don't draw hair well. It looks like spaghetti. So I tried this thing that lit me on fire, like to get to see that. And then, the image of Barbara with the hammer, it's like iconic, so it's this girl with rabbit ears holding this gigantic hammer. It's like, hell yeah, and that's what you want. That's what I want. I want to be surprised, but it's surprised in the same way, like, if comedy is sort of like it's the setup and then a subversion of expectation, but the joke only works if it makes sense, right? It doesn't if it's completely absurd, that's a whole different thing. That's what I want. Like I gave you a thing and you gave me this thing back, and it is in the lane, but maybe 5 levels higher than I expected, or it's in the lane, but you dug into some depths that I did not anticipate, and brought that in. So that's what I look for. And I've been really, really lucky to get that almost across the board. It's really rare that I don't click, with somebody. And that's been great editors and really wonderful, wonderful artists, who became friends over the years.
Feel like that's the magic of comics, right? That it is not just a singular voice. Right? Sometimes it is, but
Yeah.
most of the time it is not. Most of the time it is a collaboration, and you can see the story only really comes alive when it is ideas from both the writer and the artist, and of course the rest of the team
Yeah.
making the final product. But
Yeah, I think it's critical. It's like the first thing I ask people. Like even if you know what the job is, even if it's Superman or something, it's like, but what do you want to draw? Like, and if somebody's like, I just right now I'm obsessed with samurais. I really wish I could do something like that. I'll figure out how to put samurai in Superman. Like I want you to be able to draw these things. Um, so it's you want everybody to just have a good time, and thrill each other. And it's because and that is the only feedback loop you're getting in the beginning, right? It's
yeah,
like we have an editor saying, oh, I like this script, make these changes, or I don't like this, here's why. But if your artist is like, oh no, I dig this, it's already been through a couple of revisions usually by then. So that's, your artist is your first audience. And Ken has been the de facto editor of Giants and Sarge, and anything we've worked on, because often we don't have an editor. We're just doing our own thing.
Right.
So it's and luckily he's a writer and a storyteller, extraordinaire. So it works out great. But yeah, it's the best. It really is cool. And I love animation. I love video games. Like I love these heavy lift projects where you work on something for many years and like people that you've never even met are in the trenches, like busting their asses to make a thing. And then a year later it comes out, if it's animation or, it's a video game, maybe it's 4 years later and you get to see this product and you just, fingers crossed that it works. But comics it's so much faster and it's so much more nimble, and you can make a decision today and you'll see the impact of it in a few months. Not currently. Like currently, I'm ahead by a long shot on Spidey, but back in the day when, especially when they used to cut it close at Marvel. I mean, sometimes we'd be writing a script and that book would show up on the stands 30 days later, and I was like, I don't understand how this is happening, but sure.
I've heard that from a number of other folks. They're like, especially, it always comes up. What is it like working for DC versus Marvel? Is it pretty much the same? And other than sort of depending on the time period that you work
Mhm.
there, sort of formality of DC versus the Wild West of
Totally.
Marvel.
Hmm.
And maybe this is sort of a symptom of that. It's the sort of quickness. Is that
Hmm.
DC's like planned out months ahead, and Marvel is like hanging on to dear life, trying to get things out the door.
Yeah, I think it used to. I don't know if it's still that way, but I mean, my
Maybe
experience
not. Yeah.
is has not only because also I've been lucky enough that when somebody calls me up about something, generally speaking, they know that because I do the other things, and I'm not one of these guys that can do like 17 different projects. I'm just not. So I tend to work far in advance whenever possible. And sometimes it still gets down to the wire, and that's always funny. But yeah, at least for me, it hasn't been systemic. It's been more of it's been more organized, which is good.
Well, uh, Joe, you have a huge bibliography, and we're not going to get to everything, obviously. But you opened a little bit of a segue there with "I Kill Giants," and before we close, I'd just love to know about your creator-owned work,
Mhm.
which is kind of balanced with the more mainstream stuff. How do you know when to bring a new project into the world? I imagine, like a lot of other creators, you have sort of a notebook or you have some, vault of ideas somewhere.
Sure.
But um, you've done things like Steampunk, Four Eyes, I Kill Giants. When do you know something's ready to sort of bring out into the world or take a break from mainstream and do your own thing?
Mm. Yeah, that I wish I was more organized on. It's not usually that clear for me. It's I think some people are very smart at parlaying some mainstream success into launching books, independent books. I've never had that luck. I've never been smart enough to go, oh wait, 200,000 people read the X-Men. Maybe I should launch a creator-owned book. I'm just like happy to be on the X-Men, right? Um, so I've never quite figured out that. It usually is much more of a, do I have a Jones to do this thing? Like is it kind of burning a hole in my brain? And the creator on stuff that I did when we first got to Image, because Man of Action kind of did Image stuff all at the same time, because Joe Casey had already been working over there. It was like, we should be doing this. Um, I actually bit off a little more than I could chew. Like it was, I Kill Giants was a thing I wanted to do for a very long time. And I had asked a couple of friends to do it and it just never worked out. And then I met Ken and then it happened. Um, Bad Dog and Four Eyes, I had a lot of ambition for, and then I just got a little overwhelmed, and then I started slowing down, and then the economics of things changed, and Max had to, of course, got scooped up because he's so talented, and if I'm sitting there going like, oh, I don't have your script ready, like he's got to work.
Yeah.
Um, so I learned a lot, and I learned to be a little bit more like do the thing when it's finished, because generally those things are meant to be closed. Bad Dog was meant to be more of an ongoing That was meant to be kind of like my Deadpool replacement because I wasn't doing Deadpool anymore. And Diego's amazing and was also awesome. And we just hit a point where I was like, I'm sorry, I'm going too slow. So that was me, that was me. Um, Steampunk was I'd met Chris on a trip actually with Steve and we hit it off and he was like, do you know anything about steampunk and as a genre? And I was like, oh no. And I looked it up and I thought it was really interesting. And that's how we did it, and Chris, especially at that time, could kind of write a blank check. So it was like cliffhanger was happening and it was like, oh, Chris wants to do a book and he wants to drag me along. Hell yeah. And we did it. And that book just ultimately then the didn't hit a sales threshold. So that was why it got canceled halfway. They had asked us if we could wrap it up in like 3 issues. I'm like, I literally figured this out as 24 issues. I have 12 more. Like I can't make it 3 issues. Maybe one day we'll go back and we'll finish it. But so yeah, I mean like how to know? It's usually when it just gets me, it just burrows in, and it's like, okay, now I have to it has to grow out of that notebook. It has to be a script or I have to start talking to somebody about it. I've just been thinking about something recently actually that is I'm finding very inspirational, but like Immortal Sergeant, that took a really long time for me to write because so closely tied up with my dad and even though my dad passed away 17 years ago, it took me, you know, 15 years to finally be like, yeah, okay, it's time to hand this over to Ken. Um, so yeah, it's when the thing is ready to be born for me for creator owned stuff. I guess because both for good and for bad, like I've never I've never looked at creator owned books as a way for me personally to make a living. Like that's a roll of the dice that, I've with one or two exceptions, I've lost money on every creator owned project I've ever done because I'm either paying the artist or we start developing something and then can't do it or whatever. Like they don't throw off a ton of money. Giants luckily was a became an evergreen. Like it just word of mouth has, and because it's a self-contained graphic novel, has always, it's always come back. Um, Not to the degree where anybody could buy a house off of it, but it was just like, okay, well, it's always going to be in print. It's people keep finding it, but some of that stuff, it just you don't know even if you do get to complete it, right? There's plenty of image books that nobody remembers, right? Not everybody gets to do some big crazy, you know, sets the world on fire, Walking Dead kind of
Yeah.
scenario. So for me, they tend to be a lot more of a personal endeavor and just something I go, okay, cool. I would do this if nobody paid me because nobody is paying me. Like creator owned books, I've never been lucky enough to have somebody finance the creator owned book. Um, so it's like, okay, yeah, I'm just gonna go for. Steampunk was a cliffhanger book. In fairness, we got paid for that. But all these other things, the image books, it's just me and my friends, and we go, can we make this work? Um, so it's really the creative for me, the creative impulse. If somebody was able to point me towards a business model where I could be like, one of these smart guys, like like any of the very successful people in image, I would happily do it. But it's just it's a dice roll that if I'm gonna take that chance, I've got to really feel good about it.
Yeah.
And and when balancing it against the mainstream, for me, it's also the mainstream stuff. You do it until it's not fun. I think, it's incredible to get paid. It's incredible to, be a working professional. Like even after all this time, I really appreciate it. Like literally, like not just I don't think you can take it for granted even when you've had a long career. Because we all know the stories of comic book writers and artists that like we all read growing up, and then all of a sudden they can't get work, and then they don't have health insurance and all sorts of stuff. So I don't think you can ever take it for granted. So it's wonderful to get asked to do something mainstream. Um, and then you do it until you hit the point where you go, oh, okay, it's diminishing returns. Like I'm not going to give the audiences as good a thrill ride as I want them to get. So it's probably time for me to leave while the party's still going. It's like,
Right.
and having that instinct, some people are much better at it than I am. I've kind of developed a sense for it over the course of time. But, um, and then if you've got the nest egg, you can go, okay, cool. Now I can fund a creator project. And if not, then, you hope people can work for ownership and all that kind of stuff. I find it complicated. I find it
Yeah.
complicated.
It's
Um,
a mental, well, a mental and a financial, I guess, calculus
Yeah, and
in terms
luckily,
of,
we live in the age of Kickstarters and all that sort of
right,
stuff.
of
And I
course.
think I think the next time I do one, it I will do it as a Kickstarter first, unless something changes with somebody's business model. But because it takes a pressure off of everybody, like it's like, okay, you're not working for free, maybe I'm not working for free. That just makes life easier, for people, and you already know there's an audience that wants a thing, and that's really cool. You're not just hoping. um but I think all of us, like, you have to assume that if you want a thing, there's other people that want the same thing, and every once in a while that turns out to maybe not be as true at scale as we hope, but there's always somebody. Like, it's kind of incredible. Like, I get picked on sometimes for something like, projects that maybe didn't sell that well, you know uh like Engine Head is a very unique, like, little thing in my career. I love Engine Head. I loved working with Ted McKeever. That was incredible. Like, I was fanboying out the entire time. I think we literally sold like 1,000 copies. Like, I don't think, but every once in a while somebody will come up at a con and, like, I really love this book. What happened to this book? Thrills me to death. I love it. I'm like, you were the weirdo I wanted to write this book for, because I am the weirdo that would write this book, and it
You're
makes me
the
so
one.
happy.
Yeah.
So, you got to believe that the audience is out there, and if the modern age has taught us anything, it's that you can find those people. It's hard. It's a little hard, but they're out there.
Right.
And so you just got to have faith and put the damn thing out.
Well, Joe, I think that's a good place to leave it for now. I'd love to come back and talk a little bit more about the DC work and some of the stuff beyond. But what are you working on? And you've already said Spider-Man, and that may be, your main focus. But anything else that is recent or that is coming up in the recent future that fans can look forward to?
Yeah, sure. Amazing, yeah, Amazing Spider-Man is certainly the crown jewel at the moment, and it's so amazing and fun. And sorry, I couldn't come up with a better word than amazing. I'm
Do
a
it all
little
the time.
tired. No, it's been so fun, and I'm just having an outstanding time working on it. So, it's bi-weekly, and we're coming up on legacy numbering 975 is the next issue. So we are on the road to 1,000, which is very exciting. And it's been a blast. So Spidey, the Predator Black, White, and Blood
Mhm.
uh, book is out. Um, that's been really fun. It's just great to go. I do like it when the gloves are off and you can just go full mature nastiness. So that's been awesome. And I think they just dropped the second trailer for the Deadpool VR game, that I did a bunch of work on as a consultant and as a writer. Um, that's been a really, really wonderful experience. Like, everybody's been so cool. The game's looking great. It's been a lot of fun. Neil Patrick Harris's Deadpool, which is just insane. There's a lot of crazy casting that I can't wait for people to see. Um, I'm not exactly sure when that game ships, but they just had some more stuff at Gamescom about it. Um, and Man of Action, we're working on another game that hasn't been announced yet, but it'll be announced soon. It's an original IP thing that we're doing with a group out of Sweden that's awesome. And And yeah, and we've always got stuff in the hopper. I mean, we're just, constantly developing and seeing, what's next in the world of animation. I wish I had something to be able to announce, but we're just waiting on a bunch of stuff. So
And we're back. Joe's a professional through and through. He's just done so much, and we thank him for all his contributions to comics. Continue reading his amazing run on Amazing Spider-Man. That comes out every month from Marvel, as you well know. Thank you all out there for listening and for viewing. Thank you, Joe, for being on the program. Thank you for rating, reviewing, subscribing, doing all the things that help support this show. We have more interviews for you. In fact, one more coming up. It's a Mike on the Mic week, so you're stuck with me at least one more episode. We'll see you then. Peace.